Justin Williams of The Athletic is here. Now, I have talked to Justin various times. I've talked to him over the phone at 700 WLW. I've talked to him over the phone at ESPN 1530, all as a producer. And it's usually just a, hey, Justin, how are you doing? And then Justin says, oh, I'm good. And then I put him on hold, and then the real person talks to him. Now today, because everybody's out, everybody's on the IL, I'm hosting this show. So Justin's going to have to deal with me, and I can't thank him enough. Justin Williams of The Athletic, how are you doing, good sir?
I'm doing great. I'm glad we get to have a little bit of an extended conversation this time.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Listen, I'm very excited. I'm very excited. Now, you're not covering, unfortunately, you're not specifically covering the Bearcats anymore. Is that correct?
Yeah, a little bit broader scope now, doing some more Big 12 stuff and some national stuff, but still here in Cincinnati, still keeping tabs on the Bearcats. I watched a tough loss for them last night against Oklahoma State.
It was, and I guess we'll get right into it. I'm going to start with some Bearcats, and I want to get some generic college basketball stuff with you too. But we'll start with the Bearcats. Lose 80-76. I thought it was a mediocre Oklahoma State team. I think most people did. Vegas certainly did, with an 11-point spread. It seems like the thing that's kept us in games most of this season has been the defense. I think the defense has been elite for most of the season. The past two games, UCF, now Oklahoma State, at least down the stretch, the defense has fallen apart. And I don't know why. Is there a specific reason as to why this defense just can't defend under pressure?
Yeah, I mean, last night, especially at the end of the game, it was a mix of things. Give Oklahoma State credit. They came down, hit a couple big threes, had some freshmen step up. But a lot of times they were getting those possessions because Cincinnati gave the ball away. And so, I think part of the problem has been this is a team that for, a good chunk of the season was taking care of the ball, was defending without fouling. And when they struggled offensively, which they've done a number of times, they were still able to kind of stay in games, even though they don't have that kind of alpha go-to scorer. Well, if you're going to turn the ball over and you're going to put teams on the free throw line, then, that defense that you had, it just makes it that much tougher if teams are able to get out and run and get in transition. And so it's been very, kind of a curious season for the Bearcats. Yeah. They haven't won 2 games in a row since December, right? Haven't done it all of conference play. And it just feels like whatever hump is there for them to kind of get over and feel like a true tournament team, there's always something that gets in the way. And last night it was just, they have a lead at home against a team you should beat, and you start giving the ball away, start giving up easy baskets, and it kind of just, got away from them. And then when you don't have that go-to player, you can just, clear out, put the ball in their hand, try and have a possession where things calm down and they get a bucket. It just makes it all that much tougher.
And I think that's the biggest thing for me. I've been trying to figure out this team for quite some time, and I think I finally figured it out last night, is that you have some games where it's day-day. You have some games where it's Skillings. Every once in a while, Seamoss shows up. He drops 16 points. But it seems like they are missing the guy. I've been trying to find the guy on this team for quite some time, and I've come to the conclusion that there's just none. There's no the guy, at least as of right now. I'm going to try to be somewhat positive here. If you have to pick somebody on this roster to be or transition into that guy next year, who do you think it would be?
I mean, right now they're clearly putting that role on Seamoss's shoulders, and to his credit, I think he's doing as well as he can with it. I think they're probably asking a lot of him, maybe a little bit more than they would want to. The other person you mentioned is Skillings. Dan's super talented. He has kind of all of the athleticism and projections that you would want. He's just not quite there yet as a refined basketball player. Maybe look at the leap he took from last year to this year. It's certainly possible if he takes a similar leap next year that maybe he does become a little bit more of that go-to guy, if he can kind of refine his handle and just kind of his feel for the game. So I certainly don't want to say like that's not going to happen for him. I think if both of those guys get better and more comfortable, then maybe you're feeling a little bit better about having them at this point in the season, though, and this point in kind of their game. I think you're asking a little bit too much. And so you're right. That's a problem. I think there's a couple other things. You got to talk about the Victor Locken thing. Like, this guy was their second leading scorer and, has had a couple rough weeks and now is just completely out of the rotation. He wasn't playing well, so I kind of understand why they were docking his minutes. But basically to go from your starter and second leading player, most consistent post offensive player by far, to just sitting on the bench for 2 straight games now, that, that's a huge blow to any team that's like trying to make a tournament run. And it's, part of a bigger issue, which is just I don't think they've ever totally got their rotation set. Part of that was CJ Frederick getting hurt. Aziz missed a couple games. But when you like mix in, all right, well, now you're trying to bring CJ back, and now Vic's totally out of the rotation. It just, there does not feel like they have a lot of flow or kind of understanding of who their best 5 players are, or kind of what matchups make the most sense.
Yeah.
And so the combination of those things, not having that go-to alpha, not knowing exactly what your best matchups are, then you get kind of in these late game situations where, as much as Oklahoma State's not a great team, they're still a Big 12 team. Like, we're not in the AAC anymore. So you have this team that has those kind of deficiencies playing in the best conference in America, and it's showing up in some of the end of these games. They haven't been able to pull them out.
And I think you're right. I think Victor Locken was supposed to be the guy. He was supposed to be at least a guy, certainly. Not a guy who sits on the bench and doesn't see any minutes whatsoever. If you had to pinpoint something, and I've been trying, I don't want to kill the guy, because I think the fan base is out on him completely. Every time he walks onto the court, it's just filled with boos. The whole city is just against him right now, and it sucks. It sucks that's where we are as a fan base. But if you had to look at something, and maybe it's confidence, maybe it's the Big 12 conference as a whole. It's a bear of a conference. It's a lot different than the American, a lot different. I'm trying to figure out what the hell happened, because at some point he just started chucking up threes, and I didn't understand it completely. He made a couple early on against teams that respectfully aren't very good. But he had games against like TCU. He had a good game against TCU, and then it's just gone. It went completely away, and I'm trying to figure out what happened. Do you think it's all mental? Do you think it's just the yips?
I think mental's a part of it. I've heard people say that he was sick for a while and maybe is just still kind of getting his way back. Unfortunately, in some form or fashion, this has happened with Vic every year. He missed his true freshman year with an injury, but at some point he's either kind of suffered an injury that has set him back for a couple weeks, whether it's missing games, just getting back into shape. I don't think he's had like a full season where he's been at kind of full strength. And unfortunately, that's just, it's hurt him, it's hurt the team. So, maybe he was sick, and maybe there's, just things going on that has kind of hurt his conditioning or his flow of the game. That I totally get it. That happens. We're talking about college student athletes, like that stuff's going to happen. I don't have the, full answer or explanation for it, but it's clearly something that, if you're talking a couple weeks ago, like, oh yeah, Vic's just going to completely be a non-factor for this team down the stretch. Well, yeah, that's going to hurt them and impact them as a team. And, I think last night was an example of that.
I think switching to the other big men, you have Aziz, you have Jamil. Everybody and their brother was praying that the NCAA would let them play for us. And I think without question, UC is significantly better with them than without them. Saying that, and especially with Victor Locken being a complete no-show as of right now, we need them. We need them to perform. It seems like offensively, at least, it seems like Jamil, it seems like he travels with the ball every single time whenever he gets it. It boggles my mind. But it seems like the offensive possessions with Aziz and Jamil, there's just nothing. It just seems like I'm getting nothing from them. Every once in a while, Jamil and Aziz will go up for dunks. They do that nonsensical lob every single possession, it feels like. They'll just lob. I'm not going to go on a side tangent here, but when Dan Skillings lobbed that ball to the third row of the student section, I almost lost my mind. I almost started doing cartwheels. I was so upset. But if you had to say, again, maybe this is just them still trying to figure out this offense. They're new to the program. Why has it seemed to, at least maybe it's just me. I don't think so, though. Why has Aziz specifically struggled offensively? It doesn't seem like there's any post move whatsoever for him.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And like you mentioned, this is a player that they really wanted this offseason, that they worked really hard, even in a court and legal sense, to get eligible and be on the floor. And he's certainly an impactful player, especially on the defensive end. I don't think his offensive game is there. And maybe that transition from, when he was at Utah Valley last year to coming into the Big 12, the defense has kind of translated, the rim protection has translated, the offense has not. And so maybe that's just, talking about a step up in competition defensively and the type of athlete and caliber of player they're playing against. But it does hurt them because, you see at the end of the games, whenever they can, they substitute offense defense between Jamil and Aziz, and like you can do that. That makes sense at times, but I just think for a player that is as important to them as Aziz is, it's kind of unfortunate that you're not getting much on the offensive end, and you feel like at the end of games you can't even leave him in there. And Jamil Reynolds is a good player. I think he offers some things, but this is what we're talking about, where Vic was supposed to be that offensive player. He's certainly not the defensive player that Aziz is, but we saw last year against good competition that he can rebound, he can defend the rim, and so if you're kind of losing him as that offensive post option, then you're really hurt as a team overall. I do think they tend to play better when it's one big lineup. I'm not saying you necessarily have to do that all the time, but so I understand why they've kind of made that transition to only playing one at a time. The other thing though is I don't know that they have that like ideal kind of stretch for, they've kind of put Dan in that role or John Newman in that role at times, but they don't have that like 6'8" guy, and who I feel like they can necessarily match up against some other teams. And if they got Tyler Betsy's coming next year, maybe that's the player that it's going to be for them. So I think it's just there's little areas where I think they're a talented team. I think they have pieces to be a tournament team. They just have not found a way to either get them all right at the same time or get them kind of all moving, gelled in the same direction, unfortunately.
Switching over to the guard play a little bit, Jizzle was incredible when he was on the court yesterday. I think Mo Egger tweeted out that his plus minus was -11, which is crazy to me, because of if you were in that arena, if you were at Fifth Third and you were watching that game, when he was on the court, it looked like a completely different team. He was crossing guys up. He looked elite. He looked spectacular. He plays 14 minutes. And I don't understand why, on a team that's lacking a clear offensive consistent player, I think Jizzle could be that guy this year. And I guess what Wes said in the postgame was defensively he's not there yet, but you give up 25 points in the last 5 minutes without him. The defense looked terrible in the last 5 minutes without Jizzle, and you need offense. Why is Jizzle not playing more? I for the life of me, I can't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on it, which is he's still struggling defensively. And this is something, and I totally get this. It's not something you see as fans, even a media member. You're not necessarily always focused on, all right, what are his defensive assignments and how is he doing on his rotations and his weak side? You see, you're right. He's played well offensively. He does not play offensively like a freshman. He doesn't look offensively like a freshman. And so I think all that stuff is encouraging. But especially the way that Wes Miller coaches in his system, if he doesn't totally trust you defensively, I think it's going to be tough for him to play him, especially considering I think for the most part, Day Thomas has been a good on-ball and kind of perimeter defender for them. So you're at the end of the game, you're like, all right, well, I want to make sure we can get those stops and get that defense in there. But you brought up the point. Last night, that didn't really work, right? If you're going to play terrible defense regardless, then you might as well have Jizzle in the game. I know other people, fans have made the point of why don't you play those two together a little bit more? And I think I understand that as well and would probably like to see that a little bit more at times. But, from a coaching standpoint, I can understand if you don't totally trust a guy defensively, why it's tough to kind of give them those, especially a true freshman. You're giving them crunch time minutes at the end of the game. So I think it's all just part of again, we talked about the rotation issues. I think this is a team that, and I certainly have not been watching them quite as closely, covering them quite as closely as I have in the past. It feels like the rotation has been an issue since we've gotten into conference play.
I just don't think we figured it out. If it were up to me and I'm just some dumb fan, and I'm not Wes Miller, I'm not making fun of Wes Miller here, but I would have, if I would have Day and Jizzle in at the same exact time. I think they're both electric. I think they can work together. I think you get the elite defense from Day and you can have elite offense from Jizzle. That's at least how I would do it. Again, I'm just some dumb fan who complains from the sidelines. Is there a particular reason? I'm trying to figure out why we play so bad at home. Is Cincinnati cursed? I had this debate with Reed earlier on. I think we're cursed, Justin, because every time we play at home, it's just gut punch after gut punch, and I can't find a win. Why don't we win at home?
It's been surprising. I was there for the Houston and Iowa State games last week. The crowds are incredible. It certainly seems like that should be a lift for them. I don't have a great answer for that either. I think part of the bigger thing when I look at it is I'm looking less at like the home and road and just, the fact that they can't win back-to-back games.
Yeah.
I think that's just the sign of a team that I'm not going to say it's a young and experienced team because, they have guys like John Newman and Seamus and Aziz who have played a bunch of ball, even if they haven't played it all together. I just think it's a team that for whatever reason, whether it's injuries or just kind of the way the season's gone, they have not totally gotten on the same page and feel like a cohesive unit yet. And I think the pieces and potential are there, but look what we have 5-6 games left in the season. If that team hasn't gotten to that point, at this point, as much as it's disappointing to say, man, you lose to Oklahoma State at home, they also lost on the road to West Virginia, and now they have to go on the road to Houston and I think TCU coming up. Like it's not going to get easier. So unfortunately for this team, unless something just completely clicks with them, it feels like that NCAA tournament bubble, it just kind of feels like it's slipping away from them a little bit after last night.
And this is going to be my last UC question because you kind of just somewhat answered it there, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there a scenario? Is there a chance UC makes this tournament? I don't think, again, obviously you can win the Big 12 tournament. You can win 3 games in the Big 12 tournament, and you're there no matter what, pretty much. And barring an absolute collapse in this regular season, which I don't think is going to happen, despite the inconsistency, they're at least to a point where they can win games at some point, maybe even on the road. They'll shock somebody. If they beat TCU, Kansas State, Oklahoma, and West Virginia, they're for sure in, right? Just a loss to Houston?
Yes, everybody but Houston.
Yeah.
I mean, I would think, yes, it also depends on what some of these other bubble teams do when you start talking about bid thieves and things like that.
Right.
They're clearly on the bubble. I think the only way they won't be on the bubble is that they run the table the rest of the tournament and then maybe even win a game or two in the Big 12 tournament. So there's definitely, very clearly a path to get in. That's the benefit of being in the Big 12 is that there's always going to be big, Q1 games you can win and help your resume. The negative is that you have to go on the road to beat Houston. You have to go on the road to beat TCU, and even the home games against, Kansas State, which is not a great team, has struggled recently. Those aren't easy layup wins. We saw last night, Oklahoma State's not an easy layup win. So there's definitely still, a path for them to get the NCAA tournament. It just, if you can't beat teams like Oklahoma State at home the way they did, struggled to do last night, I have a hard time, wanting to predict that they're going to go on the road and beat Houston or go on the road and beat TCU and win some of these tougher games.
I agree with you. I think at some point you are who you are, and we're all the way through the regular season almost, and it just seems like it's too tough a hill to climb. Switching to the bubble, you mentioned the bubble. Is Gonzaga in my opinion, Gonzaga might be the most feared bubble team in the history of college basketball right now. They are going to play in Dayton. At least this is according to Lenardi, and obviously this won't be it. They play at least right now Butler. Could you see Gonzaga making a Sweet 16 run as a bubble team?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I was talking to somebody about this last week. Brendan Marks at The Athletic wrote a great feature last week about kind of how wide open this tournament feels, or this current season of college basketball feels. And because of that, I think we're getting like, what was it, UCLA a couple years ago, mixed first or second year, where they were a play-in team and made it all the way to the Final Four. I think we're getting some version of that, a team that either is on the bubble or, just kind of sneaks into a low at-large bid and gets hot at the right time and goes on a huge run. Now, we also might say if it comes to the end of the season and it's UConn versus Purdue in the championship game, then it won't feel like it was a totally wide open season. Maybe it's just that smaller group at the top as opposed to, kind of a bunch of parity. But yeah, it feels like once you get away from that top echelon of teams, which it seems pretty small, Purdue, UConn, Houston, maybe Arizona, maybe North Carolina on the right day or something like that. Yeah. I think outside of that, there's just a lot of good teams, good to decent teams that can go on runs if they get hot. Another one to me is like Kentucky, who loses again to LSU last night. But when Kentucky's on, when everything's working, they have a bunch of talent. They're really good. And when it's not, they can give up 100 points. And Gonzaga kind of feels like, another one of those teams where if everything's working and going right, then yeah, it can look good. But if you also look back at, especially a non-conference play, other than that Kentucky game that happened a couple weeks ago, most of the really good teams Gonzaga played, they lost to. So have they gotten it figured out, or are they kind of moving in the right direction now, and you don't want to face them? Maybe. Or maybe they get in the tournament and play a really good team and just kind of get stopped in their tracks again.
Do you agree with Cal that offense trumps defense when it comes March Madness? And when it comes to tournament time, a team that can score like Kentucky, they can put up 100 on you no matter at will. Do you think that trumps the great defensive teams like Houston?
I think if a team gets hot and stays hot for 3 weeks, then sure. If his Kentucky teams plays at the peak of its powers offensively, I totally agree with him. Unfortunately, that's tough to do. And a team like his, where if you're just missing from three a little bit, or somebody's having an off night, well, then you can kind of get the doors blown off you by whoever you're going against. Which to me is why like Alabama is going to be really interesting to watch, or even an Auburn team that like loves to play quick and play up and down. But if those teams go up against Houston or a Virginia team or somebody like that just really locks in defensively, like, again, if you're just having a little bit of an off night, then you can kind of run up against it with those teams. So I totally understand, but maybe a team like UConn that's pretty balanced on both ends, makes sense why they're such a good team this season. I think that might be a little bit better formula than what Cal was talking about. Sure, if you can go out and shoot the lights out every night, great, but unfortunately it doesn't always work that way, especially in college.
All right, my last question. Your piece on the Kelsey brothers, that was incredible, and I believe they read it on their podcast. Will you be seeing residuals from that?
Look, I think in a sense, I know I heard from some people, some friends of mine who maybe are illiterate but listen to podcasts, and they're like, "Hey, I heard you got a shout out on the Kelsey podcast." So it might open me up to just another group of people who don't necessarily want to read what I write but heard about it, which would be nice. But I was not expecting them to do that, especially a couple weeks after the fact on the podcast. So that was a nice little surprise yesterday for them to shout it out and maybe give it another life. It happened before, like the article ran, and then Jason Kelsey decided to go to that Buffalo game and take his shirt off and in the booth, and it kind of gave it a second life then. So this is like the third wind that the article has gotten because of those guys. So for that, I'm appreciative, and any residuals I get, I'll just take in the form of maybe people checking it out on The Athletic.
That's fair. Justin, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. I tried my best. Hopefully I was entertaining enough for you. At Williams_Justin. Everybody go follow him. He's elite. Go read the piece on the Kelsey brothers if you haven't read it yet. It's awesome. Justin, thank you very, very much, man.
Anytime. Appreciate you guys having me.
Thank you, buddy. See you.